Okay, so we are speaking with Mr. E Michael Jone, Catholic intellectual, political commentator, writer, and editor. Well, good evening.
Good evening,
Okay.
or good afternoon, as it is here.
Okay. Well, as economics is our theme, I'd like to talk to you about two subjects where morality impacts economic activity. So this would be church social teaching and usury. So let's talk about this social teaching first. If you
Okay,
Okay.
okay,
So basically, when it's applied to economics, it says basically that if you're hiring someone, you have to treat him as a God's child, and you have to pay him enough money to support a family. Now when applied, what it does, it basically creates a very motivated, efficient, and committed workforce that is producing high quality, long lasting products, but that products are, because of the salary, very expensive. Now this description conforms, let's say, a perception of German manufacturing and German products
right.
before they made some changes. Now, then why is that? And do you have something in America, some concept like this one?
Yeah, we did. In both countries, the program changed around the 1980s when Reagan became president of the United States and Paul Volcker was head of the Fed. What you saw at that time was a deliberate attempt to destroy the manufacturing base and the labor force of the United States of America in order to bring down inflation. That was the main goal. But it was like chemotherapy, where you give the patient chemotherapy and the patient dies while you're trying to cure him of cancer. So the collaboration between the United States and Germany goes all the way back to the early days of the American Republic, when a man by the name of Friedrich List arrived in Pennsylvania, to be specific. List was a German. He was a bureaucrat. He got in trouble, got out of jail, and decided to go to America. When he got to America, he realized that the system there, which had just been erected, was basically protected manufacturers. In other words, Alexander Hamilton had written a letter on manufacturers, and both List and the Carey family, who were Catholics who lived in Philadelphia, were in favor of tariffs. Tariffs were going to protect the fledgling manufacturing companies in the United States of America. This was List's belief. He worked for this belief for his entire life, especially in Germany, but he got started in the United States of America. The main problem in the world at that time was England. England had gotten a head start in the Industrial Revolution and had the most sophisticated factories in the world at that time. And as a result, they could undercut any price whatsoever on manufactured goods. So once England had this manufacturing advantage, they became promoters of free trade. And they were promoters of free trade for the reason I just mentioned, because they could undercut any price in the world.
Well, they have
So
the English were famous also for the philosophy of starvation wage. So basically,
Right.
if you're practicing that, you're kind of unfair competition to the other guys that are paying the family salary. So basically, the logical ways to protect is to establish some internal protections, something like business licensing in the U.S. or the guild system in European countries, and the external protection would be, in the American case, the secession, and in the German case, the Zollverein, right?
Yeah, that's List was the man who created the Zollverein when he got back to Germany, the customs union. The turning point for Germany, which was not a country at this point, I'm talking right after the Napoleonic Wars. The turning point came when England, along with Prussia, having conquered France, flooded Germany with cheap manufacturing goods. This was antithetical to the whole German system of organized labor. The German system was based on the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire goes all the way back to the Benedictine monasteries, which were established in Germany after the fall of the Roman Empire. The motto of the Benedictines was Ora et Labora. This is the first time in human history that work was taken seriously, that human labor was taken seriously. It was a natural consequence of Christianity, and in particular, the idea of the incarnation. If Jesus Christ could become a human being, then the things that human beings did took on new value. And so labor took on new value, and this was the beginning of the rise of the German economy. The first manifestation of this was guilds, where you had training for specific occupations. Okay, when the English flooded the German economy with goods, they were a direct challenge to the guild system. And the agents of the English were more often than not Jews. So a Jew would show up in a particular German town. Let's say there's a man in the town who has done an apprenticeship and he makes shoes. Okay, the Jew will show up with a push cart and set up in front of the establishment where the German has learned to make shoes and undercut the price of the local shoemaker. This caused outrage among the entire German working class, and it led to riots in the 1820s called the Hep Hep riots, which were basically labor riots, because the Jews were seen as undercutting the prices of German manufactured goods. So at this point, Germany didn't exist. It was a series of small principalities. Napoleon abolished the Holy Roman Empire and created a number of larger segments, but there were still, the problem with Germany was there were internal tariffs or internal taxes. You had to cross, if you wanted to go from, let's say, Bavaria to the North Sea, you had to cross about 10 national borders, depending on the time we're talking about. In the 16th century, it was probably closer to 20 national borders, but you had to cross all of these internal national borders. You had to pay a toll every time you crossed the border, and so as a result, the product was basically so expensive that no one could buy it by the time it reached its destination. So what Liszt proposed when he came back, when he came back to Germany, was the abolition of internal tariffs and the erection of external tariffs. This is what he had proposed in America when he was in America. He had followed Lafayette over to America. He eventually linked up with Lafayette. He did a national tour. And then eventually, in America, got himself involved in, he was a journalist for the Redinger Adler, which is a town outside of Philadelphia. And while he was there in Reading, he discovered coal. And so coal was the most valuable energy product in America at that time. The only, other than wood, the only energy product. Philadelphia was a huge consumer of coal. It was downriver, down the Schuylkill River from Reading. All he had to do was get the coal onto a barge. The barge would float to Philadelphia, and he would have made a lot of money. So he took out a loan, and unfortunately, the term of the loan wasn't long enough to basically build the railroad that he needed to get the coal from the mine into the river. And so his venture failed, and he had to go back to Germany. When he got back to Germany, he spent the rest of his life promoting the Zollverein and railroads, because both of them would lead to a unification of Germany, and both of them would foster manufacturing, and the tariffs would keep out cheap English manufactured goods. This was the recipe for success in Germany. Over the course of the 19th century, Germany raised wages, and by raising wages, they stopped the hemorrhaging of German labor to America. I'm half German and half Irish, and both sides of my family came to America because of wage differentials. In other words, the German skilled worker could make more in America than he could make in Germany. After the German unification, Bismarck first of all turned on the Catholics and created the Kulturkampf, which was basically a war against the Catholics. But by the end of the 1770s, he talked to Bishop von Kettler, who was one of the seminal thinkers in German economics. And von Kettler basically urged him to introduce Social Security and health insurance. That, in addition to rising wages, turned Germany into the most powerful economy in Europe. By 1910, Germany surpassed England as the most powerful economy in all areas, steel, whatever, horsepower, you name it. They were better, and this is what led, one of the factors that led England to declare war on Germany, and that led to the struggle of the 20th century, during which German economics was destroyed and simply removed from the consciousness of economic thought. So that now, if I mention Friedrich List to someone who has been trained in English economics, he will ask me, isn't that a Hungarian pianist? They've never heard of Friedrich List. This is a man, an economist in Australia told me this, economists in America have told me the same thing. They've never heard of Friedrich List, which would be like a German, there are German economists who told me they've never heard of Friedrich List, which shows you what happened after Germany got conquered. So that's basically the big picture here.
Okay. Let's talk about, let's mention another interesting, this typicality for the Germans. This almost built-in urge to constantly try to recreate or establish a Holy Roman Empire. So it never, well, sometimes it didn't basically work as planned, but is this a better option than doing the other thing that the Catholics usually do? Let's select one superpower and declare it the savior of the church, and basically put all hopes in it so they can do other things. I'm talking about the French kingdom, the Portuguese empire, and the Spanish empire, basically the U.S. in the anti-communist crusade.
Yeah, the modern economics as we know it began in Italy during the 15th century. There were two main centers of economic thought. One was Venice, one was Florence. Croatia at that point was part of the Venetian Empire, at least along the coast. Towns like Dubrovnik, I think, were part of the Venetian Empire at that point.
Dubrovnik basically almost aligned itself with the Turks just not to be under the Venetian influence. So okay, no. But the other major ports were Venetian. Basically all the ports, yes, from
Split.
Pola to Split to Zadar.
The coastline was dominated by Venice.
That's right.
Okay. The problem with Italy was largely geographical. It's a mountainous peninsula where it's difficult to travel by land from one city to another. So it lent itself naturally to the creation of city-states, but the city-states were always competing against each other, and so far they could never achieve the national unity and critical mass that, let's say, France achieved almost naturally. France is the exact opposite. It's a flat country. There are lots of rivers. England was the same way. And so as a result, the countries north of the Alps started to develop into larger entities that had much more economic power. France would be the first example of that. The trouble with Germany was that there was no Germany. The Holy Roman Empire remained divided in the same way that Italy remained divided into very small principalities. And as a result, they could never project the political and economic power that countries like France, Spain, and England could. because of their size and because of their unity. The closest that Germany came was Bavaria and Prussia. And Bavaria was Catholic and Prussia was Protestant. And eventually Prussia defeated Bavaria, and so Germany, when it was unified, became this Protestant country, which had a lot of serious consequences for development there. But that was the end of 1871, so that's the end of the 19th century. So we're talking about 400 years here of development in which Germany is simply held back because all of these principalities are too small. They're too small for their own market, to create their own market, and they have barriers against each other, so they can't collaborate either. So they're going to be stuck in a retarded stage of economic development. That's the problem with Germany. And it was, as a result, Napoleon had no problem whatsoever conquering all of those German principalities. He went through Hesse-Kassel like a hot knife through butter. And this was important because Hesse-Kassel included Frankfurt, and the Jewish moneylenders known as the Rothschild or Rothschilds lived on the Judengasse in Frankfurt. And when Napoleon showed up, the Prince of Hesse-Kassel gave Meyer Amschel Rothschild his money, his gold, and he immediately sent it to his son Nathan in London, and Nathan bet the entire fortune on the British consul and made a killing, and that was the beginning of the rise of Jewish power in England. But in general, Germany was in a similar situation to Croatia. Croatia is now in a similar situation to, let's say, Hesse-Kassel. Croatia is too small. It's too small to have a significant economy. In many ways, I'm sure there were problems with Yugoslavia. I remember Franjo Tudjman writing a book about nationalism, and he hated the idea of Yugoslavia because he thought it were always under Serbian hegemony. But the simple fact of the matter is that Yugoslavia had more political or economic mass and political power than any of these republics that it got broken up into.
Yes, that's right. But I find here a mistake, maybe from my point of view, from some analysts from the US, that see that the American interest and the American activity was onto dividing Yugoslavia. Well, being here and being the witness of the time, the American interest was basically installing a puppet and Yeltsinizing this Yugoslavia. But it got wrong, miscalculated, it basically backfired, and it ended splitting the country into Orthodox countries and non-Orthodox countries. The Orthodox countries became, let's say, potential Russian allies, and the non-Orthodox countries are now in the EU, in the next Holy Roman Empire. So we are basically...
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you know the interesting story about the founding fathers of the European Union?
I know some of this.
I can tell you that there were three guys just after the Second World War. Basically, after the Second World War, the situation was similar after the fall of the Roman Empire. The only coherent organization was the church. So basically, this first generation of politicians were all Catholics.
Yes.
So you have three guys. You have a German, a French, and Italian. Their names were Konrad Adenauer. He was German, of course. A French statesman was Robert Schuman. He was actually from Alsace. So he was fluent in German, and he was culturally very, let's say, Germanic. And the Italian guy was Alcide de Gasperi. He was from a region that Italians call the Alto Adige, or the Northern Adige, but the other people call it the Südtirol.
Südtirol, yes.
That's right. So he was also a German speaker. So basically you have...
It was the resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire.
That's right. You basically have
all Germans.
Three German-speaking Catholics that are trying to put together a community of nations, and the principles that they are trying to build in are this supranational value system, supranational value system, subsidiarity, this solidarity among nations, and social protections. So,
right.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I think the original plan could have succeeded. I think the Catholics have a natural advantage in this thing because they live in a world of subsidiarity. They understand how you can have a particular ethnic culture integrated into a larger market or larger empire, and how these things can collaborate. I think that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a successful, an example of the success of this approach.
Yeah, the important thing to make it succeed is all these three guys, these founding fathers had it, was basically this distaste, or let's say this hate to this toxic nationalism. The Americans call it, I guess, exceptionalist nationalism. So they basically have this urge for cooperation and this sense of measure among.
Right.
That
I had a long conversation about this with David Duke, the American what should I say, white guy. We were in Guadalajara. It was supposed to be something right wing, but when you're in Mexico and you're right wing, everybody starts shouting "Viva Cristo Rey!" You know, it was a Catholic movement. It wasn't race in its orientation. If there's one place that doesn't have racial orientation, it's Mexico. Everybody there is mixed race. They're called mestizos. This was the Our Lady of Guadalupe created Mexico, and she looks like a mestiza. So I was trying to explain to David Duke. David Duke projects like the American South onto Europe, and he sees Europe as white guys. I'm saying, no, they're not white guys. They're Hungarians, or they're Croatians, or they're Slovenians, or all these other countries. That's not white. You're projecting your whiteness on there. And I said, it's ethnic, not racial. I've run into people now. I just got an email from Zoltan. Zoltan from Budapest is telling me he's a white guy. Well, why are you saying this? Isn't your identity as a Hungarian enough? Because these identities all fitted together in Catholic Europe. It was only when the unity of Catholic Europe was broken with the Reformation, and then you had the rise of national churches, like the Lutheran Church. All of those national churches were basically the creation of the looting of the aristocrats. In every Protestant country, the aristocrats stole the church property and created a state church. And this was the seed of the nationalism, I think, this phony kind of nationalism that led to World War I and the destruction of Europe as a world power.
Just to go a step back, I mean, if the EU is created or has this Catholic DNA or is created in that way, then this Brexit oligarch referendum is also misread on the West. The oligarchs, I suppose, do like the British Isles and all this thing into Europe, but in order to keep Europe in check. I mean, with the Brits out, there are fears. I mean, for some people these are fears, but for other people there are hopes that Europe could go in some direction that somebody maybe won't like it to go. So, for the local oligarchy in England, the European exit strategy brings cheaper workforce. They don't have to pay now the guys from Poland and from Lithuania some, let's say, not that high but decent wages. They now have much cheaper workers from their Commonwealth, and also they can dump all this standardization and European bureaucracy and all this food and medical and drug standards that are complicating their business. So there is, in my mind, there is a conflict of big oligarchs that want the Britain to stay in the EU to keep it in check, and the small oligarchs that see some better prospects for England and for the UK outside of Europe.
Well, I think it was a reaction against the oligarchs. I don't think there's any question. I think that's also what the election of Donald Trump was. It was the reaction of the people against the oligarchic control and the total submergence of, let's say, American interest or national interest to oligarch interest. I think there had to be a reaction. I think it's a reaction across the board now.
What I'm saying, the consequence of all this could be that Europe, without Britain, would take a direction that's not, let's say, not necessarily this oligarchic. I mean, all these good ideas about solidarity.
Right. I think you may be right, because capitalism is an English invention, and America has succeeded England as the main promoter of global capitalism, and it is antithetical to the German system. So what happened is that the German system was corrupted by its contact because it became a vassal state of the United States. The European Union they were vassal states to the United States, and Germany was basically the administrator of that group of vassal states. And Germany then began to adopt basically English American capitalism in a way that was antithetical to German traditions, mainly the German tradition of high wages and the German guild as the protector of German labor. All of this stuff was being eroded. It was being eroded in places like Berlin. I gave a speech in Berlin not long ago, which has become the homosexual capital of Europe. And what you saw here was the implementation of homosexuality as a sexual liberation, as a way of destroying destroying the economic system that had been created for the family. In other words, the family wage, which Leo XIII mentioned in Rerum Novarum. This all happened in the 70s. It was largely the work of Helmut Schmidt. And the meeting took place at Chateau Rambouillet in France, where they decided to create what he called new geographies of production, which was basically offering up things like the German textile industry to globalism. He mentioned the German textile industry in particular. He said, from now on, we have satellites, we have shipping lines, we have computers. What we're going to do is outsource all of the textile production to China and Asia. This was part of the plan that began in 75, and I think it reached its culmination with Brexit, where basically everyone felt that they had gone too far. There was just too much globalism. It was too much of a good thing. And in doing this, they had perverted the original Catholic vision of people like Adenauer.
Okay, then let's return to the Reformation, and that's connected with our next topic, the usury. So in this Reformation disaster, you also basically have a couple of Germans. You have this one of the biggest usurers of all time, the German Fulgers. Then you have this monk that was specialized in writing pieces against usury. And then again you have a Catholic theologian, basically, that was hired by this super usurer to come in and defend usury. So it was it was a disgrace, and it surely helped in this at least in mobilizing the people in this Protestant Reformation and Protestant revolt.
Yes, but let's give credit to the Fugger family where they deserve it. They supported decent wages, and they created the first example of worker housing, affordable housing for workers in the world, in Augsburg.
Yes,
okay?
That was in the.
So they still had that German respect for labor.
That's
in
right.
spite of the fact, you were right. They were usurers.
But they were usurers. They did not understand this usury concept at all. And what happened further when these Protestant nations broke off from the church? basically the hierarchy and the move from the top in the Catholic part reiterated and explained again in the cyclicals and in the teachings, reiterated the teaching against the usury. But in the reformed places, in the reformed nations, there were no princes of the church. The princes of the church were replaced by, I guess, the capitalist princes. I mean, the usury from being something to revolt against was now mandatory in the Protestant lands in very, very short time. Following Calvin, and then this Calvin explanation, or the Calvin's support of usury.
Yeah, I think the best example is what happened in England. There was no theological justification whatsoever in England. I mean, in Germany, you had Luther, who wrote a lot of theology, but Thomas Müntzer, who was a friend of Luther, said, all you want is a comfortable life. You sold the church property, you gave away the church property to the princes, and they made you the head of the church state. That's the deal, because you wanted a comfortable life. Okay, that was the deal. Müntzer was right. That was the deal in every Protestant country. And in England, it was obvious there was no theological justification whatsoever for the Reformation.
Well,
it was pure unadulterated theft. All it was theft, and theft. It was a looting operation. And then later, they sprinkled some holy water on it after they created the Anglican Church. But even then, there was really no theological justification. There was no theological justification for usury either. Well, what happened is that all of those aristocrats who suddenly became rich because they stole church property, they wanted to cash in on the property. Land is not something you can take to the store and buy something with. And so they mortgaged their property, and this was the beginning of state-sponsored usury in England. And that capitalism, according to Heinrich Pesch, is state-sponsored usury. And this is how it began in England.
Okay, on the other hand, or in the Catholic tradition, you have, I was researching it, you have numerous instances of documents condemning usury. You go from, even in Rerum Novarum, I heard that in a lot of places that the Rerum Novarum does not mention usury. It actually mentions it twice. It reaffirms the condemnation. For somebody that has a search engine or a document in itself, he can find the word in two places, basically reiterating the teaching. The teaching goes all the way back from Vix Pervenit, then from the Lateran councils. You have as early as in the 4th century on the Iberian Peninsula some writings and some teachings that condemn it. You can even go as far as Jesus using force against the bankers in the temple. I mean, if something is traditional and it's in the teaching, it's the teaching against usury. But I see many traditionalists in this Western world that kind of don't mention it or don't see it, or I don't know.
Well, traditionalism has been infected by English capitalism in the United States. And so you have, it's called being a conservative. What does conservative mean? Well, it means going along with the English ideology in America, and that means going along with capitalism. And so you have institutions like the Acton Institute, just a little bit north of me in Michigan, where Father Sirica is being paid to undermine the church's teaching on usury and on wages and everything else. It's a totally phony operation. It's a running sore on the body of the church, and for some reason, nobody can stop this guy. He has the support of the bishop. He put on a program in Argentina. Bishops showed up. This is totally scandalous that a bishop would show up at anything put on by the Acton Institute. This is the corruption. His job is to undermine Catholic social teaching. That's all he does. He was quoted in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, I forget which, as saying, what Rerum Novarum said no longer applies. Well, who gave you this authority? I mean, even the Pope can't say that. Rerum Novarum is part of the magisterium of the Catholic Church. No Pope can say it doesn't apply. And then here we have Sirica having more power than the Pope. This is the big problem here in the United States, because what we're talking about is the neoconservative takeover of the Catholic mind that began in the 1990s, and I think now is coming to an end.
Yeah, I've seen these new conservative pundits on the internet, and I was looking this very popular guy, and he was commenting this Ayn Rand's philosophy. And now his line of thinking was, no, it's reprehensible. This selfishness, this abandonment of the spouse and running away with the younger, in the social life and in the human interaction, is very bad. But in the economic realm, it's good.
Well, this is good. This is the type of thinking you get from people like Tom Woods, who went to Harvard with my son. You find it in Sirica. And, of course, the father of all this was Michael Novak, who recently died. And his book, The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism, had a big effect on Poland. What it did was basically weaken Poland, weaken the resistance in Poland, and allowed the privatization looting that took place after the fall of communism.
Yes, this notion that somehow morality does not apply to economics is, I mean, nobody believes it. I was looking the case that was called the Pharma Bro or something like that. The guy basically bought some rights for some medication, and he pumped the price sevenfold. This medical.
His name is that's the guy's name. Yeah.
I don't know. And then he was saying,
but listen, Tom
Woods,
Woods,
the capitalist. he was basically right. Due to the capitalist system and this concept that morality has no place in economics, and then to save the day, they open up some totally irrelevant case, some unrelated technicality, and they lock him up for 7 years. That's some strange system and some strange functioning.
Tom Woods claims to be a Catholic, and in his book, he justified price gouging after 9/11. There was a motel on Long Island that the room suddenly jumped to 10 times the normal price because of all these people fleeing Manhattan because of 9/11. This is against the law in the state of New York. It's called price gouging. And here is this so-called Catholic apologist for economics justifying what is illegal in the state of New York. The hotel that did it was part of a chain. The chain fired the hotel manager and refunded all of the money that he charged for these people. That just shows you how ridiculous and ideological this allegiance to free market economics has become, even among so-called Catholics.
Okay. So maybe to explain better what's the difference between capitalist trade, capitalist economy, and pre-capitalist economy. I mean, before capitalism, you had international trade, you had manufacturing, you had stock exchange, you had joint ventures. What is that's now this capitalist economy has, and the old economy did not have?
The big issue was contracts. Could you enforce a usurious contract? And the answer, according to Catholic social teaching, is no. So the usurers were not happy. And in England, the usurers at the time of we're talking about the Glorious Revolution, 1688 in England. Okay, the people who had gotten rich from the looting of church property were now in control of the economy in England. And a Catholic was the legitimate heir to the throne, one of the Stuarts. And at this point, the Protestant oligarchs, the Whig oligarchs, and the members of the Catholic Anglican Church orchestrated a coup d'etat and brought in William of Orange from Holland. Had a total usurper. He had no legitimacy whatsoever, but he was Protestant. And from that point on, Protestants were the ruling class. There was no possibility of Catholics ever coming to the throne. Now, what was the difference? Well, Protestant would enforce usurious contracts. That was the whole gist of the Glorious Revolution. There were people who were lending their money and had a certain amount of insecurity if there were a Catholic monarch, because the Catholic monarch knew that it was immoral. And you can't force something that is immoral and illegal. And that was the cause of the Glorious Revolution. So one of the participants in this Glorious Revolution was Isaac Newton, the physicist. He was also working for the Treasury and creating new coinage. He was someone who had been promoted by the Whig oligarchs to a position of power, and he basically turned economics, provided the foundation to turn economics from moral philosophy into pseudo-physics. And the man who brought this about was Adam Smith. Adam Smith took Newtonian physics and applied it to economics. So it was called gravity and inertia under Newton, and it became self-interest and competition under Adam Smith. And what he did was he was hired as a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Edinburgh, because that was the state of affairs. Economics was part of moral philosophy. And he changed the parameters, and after that it became kind of pseudoscience and physics. And once you make it physics, there is no category of usury, because usury is a moral category. So suddenly the whole idea of moral content to the economics disappears automatically, and the result was the ruthless exploitation of the English people and the world under this capitalist system.
Okay. I just have to check the recording. Okay, then let's go a step back again with maybe defining the usury, the issue of the usury. There are lots of definitions. Thomas Aquinas has one. There's a definition from Vix Prevenit, but one of the clearest, in my opinion, is the one from the Lateran Fifth, the Council in Lateran. So, if you mind a quick quote. So, for this is the real meaning of usury, when from its use a thing which produces nothing is applied to the acquiring of gain and profit without any work, any expense, or any risk. So basically you have in 16th century already an elaborated, let's say, a scheme of investing, of moral investing. So basically that can also be founded in Aquinas. It basically says if you are investing in something, you have a right to get a profit if you are sharing the risk. In other words, you can lose, you can gain something if you're allowed to suffer a loss together with the guy you're investing in.
Right.
So when debating this more Western or this more fundamental capitalists, they often say, well, look how it worked great in America. See Bill Gates? Well, Bill Gates basically found his investor on the stock exchange. And on the stock exchange, well, it's not perfect, it degraded a bit, but the very nature of the stock exchange is that you put your money, and if the company goes good, your stock is worth something, and if the company goes bad, you have a worthless investment. So you're not allowed to come to Bill Gates and repossess his car or evict him from his house because his business went bust. So if Bill
That's
Gates
right.
would have taken usurious loan and was forced to make equal paid installments, he would be, I don't know, making hamburgers, I guess.
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right. The crucial issue is shared risk. If there's no shared risk, you have no right to a return. If there is a shared risk, then you do have a right to return. This is also in the gospel. The man who buried his talent didn't risk anything. He was afraid. He was a risk adverse. And because he was risk averse, he didn't deserve any return. He was reprimanded by our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So this solves the problem. This solves the whole problem of industrial investment. What I learned in the course of researching the book Barren Metal, my book on the history of capitalism as the conflict between labor and usury, as of 1910 in America, 90% of all industrial expansion was funded through profits. In other words, internally. Well, this was a catastrophe for the bankers. The bankers didn't like this idea because they were frozen out of a very lucrative market. And so they created the Fed as a way of breaking into this group of people and basically getting them to borrow money for internal improvements.
Well, the bank sector also brought some innovations in the U.S. market. You have the housing bubble, you have the student loans, you have the credit card crash or the credit card, let's say. So basically, all the entities that are making some progress and that are developing the country and they are doing good, are financed either from the profits, either from the stock exchange, and the financing by loans or by banks brought nothing but misery.
That's right, because usury is based on compound interest, and there's no force in the world, no productive force that can keep up with compound interest. It's that simple. The best example I can give is in the book Barren Metal, where I say that the Fuggers started lending to the Habsburgs in 1494, which is 2 years after Columbus discovered America. Over the next 50 years, the Habsburgs came into the possession of every gold and silver mine in the New World. And this gold and silver flowed like a river into the coffers of the Habsburg family. And yet 50 years later, they went bankrupt. Now, how can you go bankrupt when you own every gold and silver mine in the New World? Well, the answer is compound interest. And the Fuggers bragged. They considered that they never considered themselves usurers because they never charged the Habsburgs more than 6%, when the Jews were charging 43 1/3%. So even at 6%, which is moderate in terms of what was going on then, the Habsburgs could not keep up with their payments and went bankrupt. This is what's behind the concentration of wealth into fewer and fewer hands. It's usury, it's compound interest. It's guaranteed to strip money from the the majority of the population and concentrate it in the hands of a minority. It's guaranteed to do it. And that's what's happening right now.
Well, what will happen with this student loan problem? I mean, it's...
Well, right now, you're having the destruction of the labor force. You're having the destruction of the job, of the entry-level job. And so Occupy Wall Street was a protest against this. It was people in their 20s complaining that they had $50,000 or $100,000 worth of student loan, and all they could get was an unpaid internship. You put these two things together, and eventually you're going to have a default. Once you have a default on $1 trillion worth of loans, you're going to wreck the economy. That will cause a collapse of the economy. It's inevitable. The one thing you have to say about compound interest is it creates inevitable bad outcomes. There's no way around it. The only way around it in the United States has been liberal bankruptcy laws. Donald Trump has profited from liberal bankruptcy laws. He basically stiffed his creditors 3 times, usually small-time suppliers of plumbing material or stuff like that for casinos in New Jersey. Okay, they got stiffed because he ended up paying $10, taking a haircut and paying pennies on the dollar for his loan. That's the only thing that keeps the system going. And there's no forgiveness, no possibility to get out of student loans. They have been deliberately excluded from all bankruptcy laws. So what you're seeing is $1 trillion worth of debt being paid off by people who can't get jobs, and that's not going to work.
Okay. So if you one option to finance some professional, let's say professional training of a student would be some kind of a stock-like investment. I mean, if the student gets to get some six-figure salary, then okay, he's able to pay it. But if he doesn't, well, bad luck. You have a worthless stock and you throw it in the trash. But that would be, let's say, a fair scenario. But in this one, I guess he's in debt for life.
One of the main engines of debt relief is the military in the United States. This is how we create soldiers, because they offer to pay off their debts, pay off their student loan debts.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's how the system maintains its legitimacy, but it can't last. It just can't go on. So the question is, when is it going to happen? Well, no one knows. If you knew, you would sell short and you'd make a lot of money, but no one knows.
Okay. There is one topic I wanted to ask you also. Do you know for this Catholic practice to anoint some superpower that will save the church and that will do the church bidding, like it was done with France, with Spain, with Portugal in the history, even with the U.S. in the anti-communist crusade?
Yes.
You're familiar
Yes.
with it? Yes.
I am. Rome was another example. The Roman Empire was another example.
That's right.
Augustine used the Roman legions, the Roman police state, to basically destroy heresy in North Africa. He used it against the Donatists, and he was very successful. Unfortunately, when the Roman Empire collapsed, the Catholic Church collapsed in Northern Africa, and it was taken over by the Donatists. And so there was nothing but heresy in all of the North African countries because the Catholic Church lost its police power. So there's always a danger. There's always a danger when you put your trust in Caesar. And the church just seems incapable of learning how to deal with this danger.
Okay. Do you think so? The USA was the obvious candidate for helping against the communists. Do you think that it might sound heretical, but could be? I mean, Russia maybe the next perfect candidate for the next friendly power or the coming anti-liberal crusade? I mean, it sounds tempting.
Well, first of all, Russia has reinstated the Orthodox Church as the official church of Russia. That has happened already. I just don't think Russia is international in its orientation. That's just not the way Russians think. I just think that they have a different mentality. It's not the Catholic mentality. It's the whole great schism was solved after the Council of Florence. And people like Cardinal Bessarion went back to Russia and announced that the schism was over, and the people said, no, it isn't. We don't want it to be over. They wanted a kind of isolation, and the Orthodox Church has, in many ways, fostered that sense of isolation.
Well, the fact that the Sultan deposed the patriarch that agreed with ending the schism and installed another patriarch that was for prolonging the schism also helped here.
Yes, because it was advantageous to the Turks. Look, the whole reason that they had the Council of Florence is because the Patriarch of Constantinople wanted defense against the Turks. That was the whole reason for it. They needed unity, and it didn't work out. I mean, they lost Constantinople. There was a show of unity in defending Constantinople. It didn't work. Vlad the Impaler showed up to defend Constantinople, but it didn't work. It was too late. There was too much disunity in the church. It couldn't be patched over simply by the order of the Holy Roman Emperor at that time, and it failed. And so as a result, there was a choice of national churches.
But do you, then I'm mistaken if seeing some cheering for Russia, or even sprinkling, let's say, Russia as the new, let's say, the new friendly power, the new savior of.
Well, actually, I was just in Iran, in Mashhad, at a conference, and Alexander Dugin was there. And Alexander Dugin, who is now probably the official philosopher of Russia, talked about a multipolar world. You know, there's going to be the Islamic world and the South American world and the European world. There's a kind of, what I saw, I expressed objection to this after he mentioned it, because I said, it sounds like cultural relativism to me. He started talking about Chinese ontology. There's no such thing as Chinese ontology. Being is way beyond national boundaries, and so it doesn't make any sense to talk about it this way. But that's what he was talking about, and I think I think that there's a purpose for empires, and even something as wicked as the American empire, which is a wicked empire because it promotes vice as a form of control. Even that has served some good. Because the fact that we're talking in English, that we can talk to each other, is a function of the American empire, which is the successor of the British Empire, and it has created a universal language that allowed us to talk in Iran. Because the only way that Dugin could talk about his concept of the multipolar world was to talk in English, which is a unipolar world in a sense. You know, I think there is a natural tendency toward unity in the human race. And I think it's just stupid to ignore it or to pretend that you're going to go backwards. Every empire has been wicked, but God uses this evil to bring about some greater good. And so the Roman Empire gave birth to Catholic Europe. Alexander the Great's empire created a Greek-speaking world that allowed the coming of Christ. The Gospel of St. John was written in Greek, and it had to be written in Greek because Greek was the only language that had the philosophical concepts that could explain the relationship between God the Father and God the Son. So we have to keep the big picture in mind here. And you've gone through, in Croatia, this period of devolution, but I think there's a natural tendency in the opposite direction as well. And I don't know what manifestation it's going to make at this particular moment.
Well, we are the part of the EU, if you want.
So right.
We are absorbed in
another empire. Another empire.
Another empire. That's right. That's right. You're speaking about the Greeks and Athens and the pillars of the civilization. I also see that in lots of discussions about it, they also keep mentioning Athens and Jerusalem. But somehow they all missed Rome. That is basically the base of our civilization. I mean, Jerusalem and Athens combined give the civilization, and this combination is actually Rome. And it's totally,
you're absolutely right.
It is totally missed in all these discussions about the popular American philosopher, let's say.
Yeah. The man who made this apparent was St. Augustine. I'm just reading The City of God right now. It's obvious if you take Athens and combine it with Jerusalem, Rome is what brought these two things together. And then, Rome had its day, Rome fell. But it gave birth to Catholic Europe. We have been marginalized because there's a war against Catholics out there. There was a war in the United States after World War II to destroy Catholic political power. And the American empire now has taken on a particular character because of the defeat of the Catholic power, the Catholic Church in America. The crucial turning point was the murder of John F. Kennedy. That was a coup d'etat. Nobody over here believes he was murdered by Lee Harvey Oswald, unless they're paid to believe it. What that was the decapitation of the Catholic Church and the movement of this whole empire away from a Catholic direction toward a Jewish direction, which is where it is now.
Well, this fragmentization of Catholic, let's say, identity does not help. You have this traditionalist, this kind, that kind. I don't know. You kind of have like some 6 subgroups of Catholics over there, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, that's right. The only place where it hasn't, I've been successful is Poland, because the Catholic Church supported me when the Polish translation of Libido Dominandi came out there, and as a result, we destroyed gay marriage in Poland.
I think we covered this pretty well, the economic topics I wanted to cover. So, do you have something to add or some thoughts?
No, I think we've covered it pretty much. I got to get off. I got something I got to do, but I mean, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I think this is a serious discussion we had.
Okay.
And I hope you get some type of response to it when it gets broadcast in Croatia.
I'll let you know. Okay. Mr. E Michael Jone, thank you very much, and hope to speak to you again. Bye.
Thanks, Tony.